The child was born who couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts for poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. With Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history, this land of flowers.
The weekend was on the 27th of January, 2018, from WBRN Radio in Boston and on the Boston Red Network. Very interesting week we've just concluded here, and we look back upon it. Primarily, DJ Trump was at the World Economic Forum and made a mockery out of it, as one could only suspect. He literally stood there over 3 minutes with what could only be described as toy soldiers, and they were playing a march, and he stood there and looked at the audience. But more than that, what his message was that robber baron capitalism had taken over the U.S. The U.S. was quote-unquote open for business. Well, no doubt about that. Open season on the land, sea, the little animals that inhabited, including the people of the United States. This is what we face in January of 2018. We'll start looking at some of this. We'll start with the flu epidemic across the country, which reflects back upon what type of healthcare system that we have. A little look at the infrastructure plan. This is part of the robber baron plan, the relaxation of various types of regulation. We won't spend a lot of time here on the economic aspects of Trump's plan and the current economic conditions, other than to say that GDP at 2.6% is very good, given the situation. And you have to realize that the country was in a depression when Barack Obama took over in 2009. Complete shambles were going on there. The banks were going down like dominoes. The automobile industry was on the ledge of being literally pushed off. And some politicians, like Willard Romney, just said, let that sector go. They could have let the sector go, but part of the problem is in the automobile industry is the supply chain. And that is very, very important. Thousands of people and hundreds of thousands of people work in that particular sector. What we see right now is a very interesting development. It's a short-term sort of injection into American industrial capitalism. But it's a very tenuous situation in that consumers basically support about 70% of the economy. And consumers themselves are very fickle. What we had is most of the expansion here is done by what you'd call a little stimulus, and Wall Street very speculative. You have companies that are overvalued, no doubt about it, and the market has been up, but is the market a barometer of the economy? That is absolutely not. It is to a certain degree. People see the market up, well, the good times are here. But in retrospect, good times are not perhaps where they think they are. And this is part of the problem here, that the whole idea of growth and labor participation has been oversold by this administration, talking about 3.5, and perhaps even 4%, which was never sustainable. But you could have a 3.5 a quarter. I mean, that's possible. The Chinese ran very good numbers for a long time, and now they have come down, and they will go down in the future because of many things in the market. But where this comes back into American politics is that you have supposedly a better economy because, again, 10 years out of the Depression, you start to level off at about 2.5% GDP. But at the same time, you have these various stimulus programs, the tax cuts. Tax cuts are supposed to stimulate the economy, but they are very, very short term. And this is the reason we show with alarm 2018 to 2009. That issue will be decided. Most corporations now are taking a hit, and many of them are buying back their stocks. They are giving bonuses out, or have given bonuses out, and they have raised salaries. But at the same time, all this is inflationary, so you have another problem going on. And then you get into your stimulus program is not the traditional government pump priming type program. What we are seeing here is a partnership, private-public partnership, and at the same time relaxing the regulations, which means they will let these private companies exploit various mineral assets. And that in itself opens the country up for ecological damage in years to come. So in other words, the short-term consequences will be there, but there's also a big problem in terms of these natural resources and their pricing, we'll call it. Many of them, depends on which ones you're talking about, but if the fossil fuels in particular, they are limited by growths of the economies, and also economies are moving to more sustainable type energy solutions away from fossil fuel as quickly as they can move. China in particular that does need to move. India is trying to do the move. They have plenty of sunshine there. So those things are happening. At the same time, you have protectionism. Now it's limited to washing machines and solar panels. Well, they'll bring back a few solar panel jobs. We'll say they'll bring back 5,000 solar panel jobs to 10,000. But at the same time, the installers who are installing these panels made in China, they will lose jobs because the solar panels made in the U.S. will cost more. And with a 75% tariff, the Chinese panels will not come into the U.S. So in other words, the verdict is out how many jobs you're creating. If you create 5,000 to 10,000 jobs, lose 5,000 jobs, or disrupt the market, you got some problems. As far as the so-called washing machines, again, that is a situation that the American consumer will bear the cost because they will go up. There will be fewer coming in. The Koreans will not be sending them in, and you are starting a trade war. And in a fragile economy, you do not want to do that. Let's move to the pandemic out here. And this is the nation's healthcare system, the Centers for Disease Control, which were furloughed out there. 12,000 people have been hospitalized with influenza, an increase of 3,000 just 1 week. That's according to them. The rates of people seeking care now rivals the swine flu pandemic of 2009, almost 10 years ago. In Florida, West Baton Rouge West Boca, Medical Center in Boca Raton, Florida, seen a surge of patients. And who knows what the next few weeks will bring. That's from Adam Leslie, head of head of the ER department there. In Chicago, they have shortage of beds there, so they have to use emergency vehicles to set outside of the medical centers. In New York State, an emergency order was issued allowing pharmacists to give vaccinations to children. The toll on children has been especially severe. The pediatric death count is likely to approach, if not exceed, 150 deaths reported during especially severe influenza seasons of 2014-2015. The vet season ended with 56,000 influenza-related deaths, 710,000 people hospitalized, 16 million who sought care from clinicians and medical centers. That's a lot of people. Particular nasty strains out there, one known as H3N2. Another strain begins showing up, hitting baby boomers especially hard, although experts have not figured out exactly why. So some of those problems are out there too. Usually these things hit the children much harder. They give an example of a case in the Midwest. A little boy, 9 years old, had a sore throat, rushed to a medical center. Doctors struggled to get oxygen into his lung. They had to put him on a resuscitative machine. Literally, the young child, name was Grant, and connected him to a lung bypass machine. In years past, we would not have had a lung bypass machine. Two differences this year in the influenza season that hit almost all states at the same time and has stayed at high levels nationally for 3 consecutive weeks. The flus most commonly appear in different parts of the country at different times. This time, it just all came at once. It begins in October, but there's a rapid ramp up, of course, in January after the holidays, probably triggered by children returning to school and spreading, of course, the viruses. The concern is with an emergency, we could be getting at a tipping point where the demand of the community exceed the capacity of the country. That's from James Blumenstock, the Chief Program Officer of the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials. Most people are seeking care for flu-like illnesses than at any time since 2009-2010. The last time the country experienced high levels of influenza-like was in 2003-2004. People over 65 are usually the ones with the highest hospitalization rates, with the second most affected group being children under 4. But officials have been taken aback in recent years to see individuals with the second highest rate are 50 to 64. This season, the hospitalization rate for 50 to 64 is 4.2% per 100,000, which is significantly higher than rates of past flu seasons. Baby boomers have high rates of hospitalization than their grandchildren right now, and of course that's surprising too. Usually the grandkids would be hard hit. Besides the H3N2, 2 other flu strains out there, H1N1, that's the swine flu one, and now a regular flu virus, an influenza B strand, B as in boy. H1N1 doesn't hit people over 65 as hard. H3N2 strain is effectively against the other 2 strains that are now appearing The current vaccine protects against all three prevalent strains out there if you've had it. And this is another problem we have now. I hadn't heard as much this year, but the nuts are out telling people not to get vaccinated based upon crackpots. Nothing scientific about those studies. And one of the problems is that you have people purporting to do studies, and it's not confined to the nuts, but they're not based upon a sound methodology. And that is one of the big problems we have in many of the drug-related studies. They are studies by various makers of these products, which tend to sway the study in such a way that it's favorable for their drugs, and then we go back and do a better study and find out that the whole thing was severely flawed and take it off the market. That's the problem when you do not have a healthcare system or a drug system of regulation that is adequate. Now, yes, in some instances, there are some new drugs that could benefit people taking out there, but these are not mass drugs. These are drugs given to small populations, and thus you control deaths. But when you start talking about major drugs, some of the chemotherapies, or some of the hypertension, various other types of drugs that hundreds of thousands of people are exposed to, then you have very severe problems. But because of social media out there, any kook can get on there, and kooks tend to gravitate to kookdom, literally. They had a case, last week there of some county person out of Cook County running for the chair. And someone suggested, well, you could have that chair come and run in Hennepin. Well, it doesn't really matter. In many of these setups, especially on the county level, you have Republican types that are running the counties, whereas the more progressive types are running the cities. That's a hayseed factor there. You'll see some of that happening out there. But what the trend is, and this is the reason we brought it up, the trend is now that in the particularly in the progressive movements, we are now seeing a better leadership than we've had in the past. We have better analytics out there, and although some of our younger people, or even some of the people that are out there, don't have as much experience, by trial and error, they're able to get things done, particularly at the grassroots level, that has not been able to do. And part of this is across the environmental movement and various others. There's so many of these people out there, and there are organizations that just did quote-unquote pro forma work, or that they embedded themselves as some of the so-called progressive / leftists into the Hillary the Monster Clinton campaign, and said, well, okay, if we can elect old Monster, things will be as usual, except for 100 different wars. Yes, it would have been different there, but now we have the robber baron, as people call him, the gangster DJ Trump, at the control panel there. And what we're seeing is the most bearish form of capitalism, with all the gloves taken off, or at least all the gloves they can take off. At this time in the 20s, it would have been different. Let me just move on here. We covered the inner structure somewhat. The panel would reduce environmental requirements. This is the proposal. This is a draft to scale back the proposals. This will be what Trump will introduce next week. A wall with Mexico, where the National Park Service could object to development, would impair tourists' view from scenic parks like the Grand Canyon. In other words, they want to put in an oil derrick or something up there, period. We have no intention of, forget that. That is silly. But again, it's not what their intention is. It's what this administration would do. So you've seen a lot of kooky things going on out here. The proposed draft. I don't have it at this time. We'll maybe append that to a later broadcast. We don't want to spend any more time on him. The State of the Union coming up here, I think we pretty much get this S&P has jumped. This is the S&P, Standard Poor's S&P, 1.4% today after Trump's speech. That was last February. That was promising the tax cuts and etc. With the new tax on his belt, he's expected to use his last night's State of the Union speech on Tuesday to applaud the victories. There was sort of victory lap there. This may not be enough to, and this is one of the problems when corporate profits go up, people expect more. Now, the enthusiasm about the tax cuts pushed the S&P more than 19% this year, and closed 7% up 7% so far this year. Nothing's going to Trump tax reform. That's from Michael O'Rourke in Greenwich, Connecticut. Since I expect the president to do a victory lap, the typical market reaction would be sell the news reaction in contrast to last year. Well, yeah, they have got it. Investors could be rattled by issues including immigration. As we've said at this mic a number of times, immigration is a business-based issue, basically, leading to a 3-day government shutdown. He's got to tread carefully on the hot-button issues. That is from Phil Blasito, one of the asset manager types here, citing immigration and trade. That'll be a big one. The NAFTA thing is on the table with the Canadians, not moving anywhere there. And then the infrastructure, $1.7 trillion, a lot of money, over 10 years. But any related gains may be limited to industrials and materials. And so this is one of the big items that you run into every time you get into these kinds of things. Let me just we won't spend a lot of time on this, but we will spend a couple of minutes here on the booze at the Economic Forum, booze for Trump at Davos. When he said, talked about fake news there, that was from our old pal Jennifer Jacobs, who used to be at the paper there in Iowa. She's now the Bloomberg White House correspondent. Congratulations to her. And hissing in the audience at the reference to his tax package, tweeted Katie Martin. Now she's from the Financial Times, who added the fake news comment drew boos and some ironic applause. I don't know who those people were. It must have been on crack. The speech otherwise stuck to his talking points. This is old Trump. He praised the tax bill, the stock market gains, his effort to dismantle many business regulations. This is the dark side of Davos. And you have to understand, any business meeting, there's always going to be a dark side, period. And old DJ Trump says, as a business type, I always tended really, was treated well by the press. You know, the numbers are spark and things happen, but I always have had really good press. Well, this is the flip side of it. This is where the monopoly media plays into it. They are playing this up. They played up Davos to the situation that Dr. Schwab literally had, as we said, the toy soldiers in there. And we'll air that particular one a little later here. One, the BR on the World. The military band greets him in Davos. This is at the Landwelders of Freiburg, I suppose. A band that gathered there. They've been around, 214 years to serve up a fanfare-like welcome there, and Dr. Schwab didn't do himself any good. We'll put that picture there, and it's enough of that mess. And lastly, we got to get to Uncle Karl Rove, a Bay Area man who spent 13 years in a prison, found not guilty. The Innocent Project there. This is down in San Jose. He was convicted in 1991 of molesting a 2-year-old girl. Spent 13 years in prison. The critical evidence against him was expert testimony by and this is what we talked about this a lot during the so-called trial of the century, the trial of the all-American hero O.J. Simpson, by a county forensic analyst that found hair on Payne must have come from the victim. And there was only one chance in 129,600 that it came someone else. 4 months ago, the analyst recanted his testimony, saying that it was based on unreliable studies and he would never make such a statistical claim today. Without objection from the prosecution, the Santa Clara County there overturned Payne's conviction, and his criminal record was cleared. That was Vanessa Zacher, I think. I'm very thankful to all of that, Payne 55 said after a brief hearing. Oh, very good for Mr. Payne and the Innocent Project. They win one. Glenn Payne was his name. Let's now go to Uncle Karl Rove. We don't want to leave Uncle out here. Let's see. Here we are. I was looking at silver sneakers here. There's a new food pyramid out here for older adults. And we'll get to that in another broadcast when we have a little bit more time here. And we'll get this one also. The Trump the candidate versus Trump the president. David Lowenthal on politics and money in 1 year. This is from the Center for Public Integrity. We'll get this one on Monday night probably. Nonetheless, the aftermath of the shutdown. This is Uncle Karl writing in the Wall Street Journal on the 25th of January. The swiftness with which events erupt in Washington then disappear is enough to raise doubts about Einstein's theory that nothing moves faster than the speed of light. The Senate leader Schumer ought to know this, that his latest gambit vanished too quickly on behalf of seemingly united Democratic Party. Schumer threatened to shut the government down unless Congress passed a fix for the Dreamers, undocumented immigrants brought here as children. 3 days later, Schumer caved in. The Democrats were in fact neither united nor possessors of a strategy to back up their threat. Now the anger among progressives at Schumer for giving in may boost left-wingers in primaries, making it more difficult for Democrats to win swing districts in November of this year. Schumer should have remembered that at least in the short run, whoever caused the shutdown loses. In 2013, Ted and Lion Cruz convinced the GOP House it could defund Obamacare. Republicans took the blame for the subsequent shutdown, since it was obvious to the media and the voters that they lacked any strategy to force the Democrats' hand. Cruz yield, and the Republicans' numbers tanked. Well, it may have tanked, but it didn't hurt them in 2014. While Republicans picked up 9 Senate seats, 13 House seats in 2014, the gains were despite the shutdown, not because of it. 5 Republican Congress who flipped the Senate Democrat seats, none made support for the shutdown a principal campaign issue. And he's citing, and this is something that's kind of interesting now, the Harvard-Harris poll found 58% of the voters opposed the Democrats voting to shut down the government. That poll was an outlier. For work permits for the Dreamers, a CNN poll found 58% of adults believed approval of budget agreement that would avoid a government shutdown was more important than passing a legislation to maintain the program that allowed immigrant aliens as children to remain in the U.S. Still, while Democrats lost the question of closing the government down, Americans overwhelmingly want the Dreamers to stay. Well, there's a lot of contradictions here in itself. A CBS poll found 87% of adults support allowing young immigrants who were brought to the U.S. as children to remain in the country, with 11%. Well, it doesn't even matter. Meanwhile, a CNN poll showed 82% backed a plan to allow them. DJ Trump's going to come up with some kind of scheme that they can stick around for 10 years and get full citizenship. 10 years is a very long time. If a young person is 20 years old, it'd be 30 years old. If 30 years old, it'd be 40 years old. So Republicans should recall that in a 2016 exit poll, only 13% of voters said immigration was an important issue. We went over many of the issues with the Pew study, and we posted on our program. I believe it was last night on Friday Java. Nonetheless, Uncle Carl suggested resolving immigration would allow the GOP to focus on the economy. Well, the GOP is indeed focusing on the economy. The next big issue, of course, coming up will be the infrastructure program. Now, the infrastructure program is very, very tricky before we go to sports here, because Democrats have long wanted an infrastructure program. They wanted an infrastructure program under President Barack Obama, but they never got to infrastructure because the Republicans simply would not bring it up. It was a different type of infrastructure program. This infrastructure program is in itself a phony infrastructure program. It's a giveaway to a business, big business there that would sell cement and various other type of materials to rebuild the highways. It would be with toll roads and all kinds of gimmicks here. So it would not serve the needs of the public. So the Democrats there have to be very, very careful as to what's going on. It's back to a question I think Diane G. He posed about the neoliberals as opposed to the conservative yellow dog Democrat types that are out there, which are the most destructive. Well, the neocons, no doubt about it, but they're basically the same type of people, period. They're running along the same ideological fault lines. And we understand that in many instances, as in the Senate there, in critical issues, those types of Democrats would be useless. And as Professor Reich so points out, that what we are dealing with now is beyond just simple candidates. Yes, we run candidates. Yes, progressives run candidates. And many of them within the Democratic Party. Why? The Democratic Party is already set up. Saves costs, etc. But at the same time, you have to look to candidates in this particular body politic as having limitations. They can't work miracles. There's no doubt about that. We'd have single payer. We have to struggle and fight for single payer. Unfortunately, now we're getting better tactics out here. We're getting better organized. Many of these pro forma type characters are either retiring or stepping back. Even some of the leftists now former leftists, I would say, make less noise. They're just holding positions, and their positions are for the most part harmless. Anyway, let's pause a second here. I want to have a commercial break here, other than to say that Numbers Man, our financial program, macroeconomic program, will appear this week, and it's brought to us by Cranston Analytics. And also our technical program, the Open Source Report. We have a lot to talk about there, and it will appear this weekend in the series also. All right, we're back. This is sports. Michigan State is unfolding there. Let's see, who is this person? They've been investigating various programs there that Michigan State claimed that they had everything under control, and they did not. The Michigan State athletic physician is Larry Nassar. He's the fellow that's going to jail, and he should be in jail at the center of the gymnastics scandals, improper touching there. The Spartans athletic department, whose top leader Mike Hollis resigned on a Friday. So he is out, and questions about other people here. The most recognizable figure that is the football coach, Danonino, Mark Danonino, and the basketball coach Tom Izzo have had instances involved in their programs outside the line. Found Dan Tanamino tenure began in 2007, and at least 16 football players have been accused of sexual assault or violence against women, according to interviews and public records. Danonino was said to be involved in handling the discipline at least one of these cases several years ago there, so he is on the line also. And Izzo, the basketball coach, including one report made against a former undergraduate student assistant coach who was allowed to continue coaching after he had been criminally charged for punching a female student at Michigan State in the face in a bar. That was in 2010, quite a few years ago. A few months later, after the Spartans qualified for the Final Four, the assistant coach was accused of sexually assaulting a different female student. So, Michigan State officials, including Lou and Simon, who resigned on Wednesday, had been criticized for lack of leadership, no doubt about that. This Nassar case opened it all up, so officials at Michigan State are resigning right and left. In a resignation statement, Simon was defiant, saying that as a tragedy are politicized and someone who has to take the blame. She praised her campus police department, handling of Nassar. I'm not sure what they did there. Former Michigan State sexual assault coordinator, Sweeney, left the university over frustration about how the administration handles sexual assault cases in 2005. So now all of this is coming out here. This Hollis guy evidently is gone, and we have to watch where he'll resurface. Now Nassar, let's see, pled guilty in November to 10 counts of first-degree sexual criminal conduct with victims as young as 6 years. Well, this is a pathetic character. So anyway, the athletic director is now gone. And what will happen to Danonino, we don't know here. We'll put a picture of him up there, and what could turn out to be the Rogues Gallery. January 2017, a report by a female Michigan State student who told police she was drugged into a bathroom during a party and forced to perform oral sex on 3 football players. So, I mean, it goes on and on and on. We won't spend a lot of time on it. Let's get to the NBA scores from last night. The Hawks were at the Hornets. Hornets 121-110. The Pacers were in Cleveland. Cleveland finally wins a game and stopped the skid, I suppose. 115-108. The Cavaliers over the Pacers. And the Jazz and Raptors, Jazz 97-93. The Lakers were in Chicago, always a big game there. Much more so in past years. The Lakers 108-103 for the Bulls. The Clippers were at the Grizzlies. 109 Clippers, 100 for the Grizzlies. The Nets were at the Bucks in Milwaukee. 116 for the Bucks, 91 for the Nets. The Rockets and Pelicans in the Big Easy. Pelicans 115-113. The Trailblazers in Dallas, they beat the Mavericks 107-93. And the Sixers of Philadelphia were in San Antonio, a long ways away. Anyway, nonetheless, 97-78. They succumbed over the Spurs. And the Knickerbockers and Suns out in Phoenix. Knicks had a good game there, 107-85. On to college basketball. Only had one game on Friday night. Wisconsin at number 6, Michigan State. Scandals and all. 76-61 Michigan State. I suppose Tom Izzo will stay in pretty good shape there. The NBA. And we'll have to get the scores. We got a minute here. These fascinating names have always fascinated us. But one of the problems is, and of course, we do college sports. Hit the wrong key here. Anyway, we'll get that up. One of the things that fascinates us about college sports is we have it, but there's big money. Men's football, men's basketball. Coaches make several $1 million a year. It is literally an affront to the academic community. And perhaps because of some of these types of situations that are coming about. Having all kinds of trouble with the NHL here. Wrong night. Anyway, we'll try it again. One of the big problems, of course, with collegiate sports is that the pro or the money atmosphere is there, and that in itself taints many, many things. And as the Michigan State saga unfolds, from the top administration to the administration of the athletic program there, and it's not done yet. And part of the reason there is in this atmosphere of social media, even at ESPN, there are more investigative type journalists are hired there in a time that a lot of decline is coming about in other places like the LA Times. We'll have that story on the Monday morning quarterback. And we'll need to find out what is going in the wrong direction here. With the NHL, we may have to forego the NHL. Oh, I suppose the NHL's All-Star Game is coming up also, yeah. Everyone's having an all-star game here as NHL season goes on, the NBA season goes on, and the much maligned NFL season, which will end next week, goes on. We're boycotting the NFL, and that's why you don't hear news directly of them. Now, obviously, in this type of atmosphere, you will hear some things from the NFL. If not the games, we won't report on those. But there are other incidences that do in fact happen, and I'm guessing here we're heading to the All-Star game here for the NHL. So we have some things going on here. We'll see quickly we can do this. Here's how to make the NHL All-Star game a more this is more competitive. Well, we won't get into that one. It just the NHL All-Star Game has had several different formats since the 40s. The Stanley Cup the defending champs take on a group of All-Stars from 5 others, etc., etc. Different committees up there. Of course, you have more teams in hockey now, in professional hockey, than ever before. Allow the fans to vote for each division team. I'm not sure. We'll have to do this at a separate time because we really don't have now the background to hear and do it in a way in which we'd like to do it. Nonetheless, this will do it for us. We'll see you on the Monday morning quarterback on these various outlets here. And incidentally, we are coming soon. I should be to Google Play. That is Android. We are finally moving there. So the trend is internet radio is moving to more and more platforms, and that platform has been open for a while, but we're just moving there. So we are making 1 inch at a time. Good day.